Michael Meehan, the Connacht final has ended 2-14 to Mayo, 2-8 to Galway, a 6-point win for Mayo, but it was looking very different at half time in that game as Galway led by 5 points. Where should we start with this game? Do we start with the start of the second half? Galway are 5 up. What happens next?
Yeah, Tommy, that's it was the speed at which Mayo were able to get back into it. I think Galway missed a free, Matthew Tierney at the very start of the second half, and very quickly then we had Aidan O'Shea claiming that super take inside the square, and his offload to Matty Ruan, who was swarmed by 2-3 players. Maybe he was getting his shot away, or maybe they didn't need to foul him. I only saw it the once. But yeah, it was just the speed at which Mayo got a foothold. All of a sudden they'd cut the deficit with that goal, nicely taken by Ryan O'Donoghue, and they followed it up quite quickly again. So they had a completely different mindset. Half time probably came at the right time for them. James Horan, I'd say, read the riot act a little bit. You saw different performances from the Matty Ruan came storming into it, and they changed a couple of the matchups at the back as well. Aidan O'Shea was more influential. I thought the substitutions at half time, the two McLaughlins coming in, they played a role, very direct. Owen, Kevin then, just with his passing, he scored, he assisted. You know what you're going to get. He's a super kind of unsung hero really for Mayo, and especially when they had so much possession, having him on the pitch, being able to pull the strings, that created opportunities for other players inside, and it just heaped more and more pressure onto Galway.
Galway had been exceptional in the second quarter. They scored 2 goals. They kept Mayo scoreless for about 17 minutes, but in the second half, Michael, they only kicked 3 points, and it was 3 Matthew Tierney frees. You mentioned the Tierney chance they missed at the start of the half. Comer had an effort to come off the crossbar. There was a couple of shots dropped short. How much does that suck the life out of a team when another team has a run on you?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's all about momentum, and you're never going to have gung-ho momentum all the time. But if you're clinging on, then you just need to get those points, slow things down. Every point, every free that you can take gives you a chance to set up for the opponent's kick out. And Galway just couldn't find their feet, couldn't get that grip on it. I think it was straight from that 1 point attempt dropping short onto Damien Comer. He did very well to get a contact on it, and it hits the crossbar, and it doesn't go over, it comes back out again. So, and that comes straight down. That ends up in a point down here, if I'm not mistaken. In a matter of seconds. So that is a crushing blow for Galway to ride that out, because they were struggling. They couldn't get to the tempo of the game in that second half, and it was all one-way traffic. I think a little something to consider was the fact the injuries they picked up in the first half were quite early, to Robert Finnerty and to Sean Kelly, having to bring in players that early. Obviously those players weren't there to be introduced earlier in the second half, when maybe you would hope to get them on the pitch. And Sean Kelly was a shining light for Galway this season, and he would have been rampaging up and down the pitch in that second half, bringing the fight to Mayo. So his loss was huge.
You mentioned the 2 injuries there, 2 forced substitutions for Porrick Joyce before half time. Just after Shane Walsh created that second goal for Damien Comer, he went down here beneath us in the press box. I'm not sure we had the best view of it, but Porrick Joyce was raging on the sideline, and just speaking afterwards there, he was quite upset that neither the linesman or the referee had seen it. He confirmed that Shane Walsh had to get an injection at half time, so he wasn't happy.
Yeah, something had happened. As you said, we missed it live. We'll get to see it maybe later on. I'm sure it'll be talked about when the video and all the different camera angles are looked at. So, if something happens there and there's no punishment allocated, then that is disappointing. I think the most disappointing thing was Shane, who seemed to be in a good bit of discomfort with a shoulder injury. He actually didn't finish the game. He was taken off there near the end, and I had said coming in today that Galway needed all their big players needed to have a big game for them to give them a good chance. Shane was on song up to that. He was influential in the match, a couple of good scores. He did brilliantly for that goal where he laid off to Damien Comer to finish. He did all the hard work, and he made the right decision. So if the injury impacted on him then, and the way it came about, Porrick has a right to feel aggrieved a little bit.
Was it clumsiness or a bit of cuteness?
Why?
For the 3 incidents.
Oh, I don't know. Like you could. There was definitely Robert Finnerty was he tangled legs with someone as well. But look, these things happen. Clumsiness or coincidence, I don't know. But they could happen 10 times in a match, and no one gets injured from them as well. That kind of way. So it's just the look of the thing on the day. Like at half time, we were extremely happy. Galway had brought the fight. Massive performance by Paul Conroy, Dylan McHugh, lads like that. Damien Comer, Shane Walsh as well, and it's just that half time came, I suppose, at the wrong time really, and it gave James Horan a chance to get his guys and probably grab them by the scruff of the neck, so to speak, and tell them, stew or die championship. There's a long journey home, or there's a great 2 weeks or 3 weeks looking forward to an All-Ireland semi-final at that stage.
It was a great position at half time. They were 5 points clear, as we said. They were in complete control at that stage. It's kind of reflective of Porrick Joyce's 2 years in charge. A great start, you could say, about the league initially before the pandemic and COVID hit. And ever since, Galway have really struggled to get a bit of momentum. That's just 3 championship games now Joyce has had in charge of Galway. Have you seen enough to believe that he's the man to continue to take this team forward?
Yeah, it's the 2 year, it spanned 2 years, the 2 COVID seasons, and I suppose the context of it is, and I know this is the same for everyone, but he's had 3 championship games, 4 league games this year. The league was ran off last year in 2 halves. So I think the need for a consistent season, a normal season as we'd refer to it, with your 7 or 8 league games, and then your championship, your qualifier route, your Super 8s or whatever it might be. I think for every manager, they deserve a crack at that over in terms of having come through the last 2 seasons. He has brought new players through. We were delighted with Matthew Tierney and the Kellys, in the Hyde Park 2-3 weeks ago. It didn't work out as well for those guys, but there's Jack Lynn there as well. There's he has integrated a certain number of players to the team in the last season. I think only 7 of the team today started in the Connacht final last November. So he's trying to get the players he wants in, and I think that fast forward into a normal pre-season and a normal season ahead. I think that's what we have to look forward to now and back him.
Let's talk about Mayo. They had scored over 20 points in every game up to this. They had Division 2 opposition. They got promoted. They dispatched of Sligo and Leitrim quite easily in both games. You mentioned that James Horan may have read that riot act at half time. It's probably something they needed.
Yeah, I think definitely. A facile victory. You don't learn an awful lot about yourself with facile victories, and they marched through Connacht. So before today, at a canter. So they'd take a little bit more. There was a situation there at half time, the first half. They just weren't at the races. They were sloppy. Their intensity, that they weren't the usual rampaging Mayo that the Mayo team that James Horan likes to build. And they corrected that. And they had a few key players, like every team does. You need your key players playing for you. They weren't necessarily involved heavily in the game in the first half either. When those guys got into the game, everything turns then, and they need that game. They needed that game. They cannot give a first half like that to their opponent in the All-Ireland semi-final, or they won't. That won't work on that occasion. So they'll be hoping that they can iron out those couple of issues. They're normally they're normally an out of the blocks kind of team. They usually rack up scores early in the first half or even in the first quarter. So I'd say James is anxious that they can return to that in the next day out.
What do you make of the 2 Mayo corner forwards, 2 young lads, Ryan O'Donoghue and Tommy Conroy? Because they breezed through the Division 2 campaign, as we said. They haven't been overly challenged so far. Conroy really came into his own in the second half, kicked a couple of great points. What do you make of him?
Yeah, and we would have talked about him a little bit at half time. It just wasn't flowing for him in the first half. He hesitated on one great turnover from Aidan O'Shea, went all the way down to him. It was a half a goal chance. A point probably would have been perfect at the time just to get them back in the game. He sort of half hesitated. He ended up getting turned over, so it wasn't going for him. In fairness to him, then he roared into the second half with a couple of early scores. He worked very hard to, he's a super player on the ball. He's great speed, great close control. I think he's a very dangerous forward, and I suppose he was excellent all last year, maybe up to the point of the All-Ireland final. I'm sure he's delighted with himself now to have gotten through another game in Croke Park, because he is still very young, and to have finished that game quite well. That'll set him up for the next game. And again, Ryan O'Donoghue, he took, by and large, I think he didn't miss any of his frees. He tucked away the penalty. There's a lot of debate about one of the goals he scored. It was a slight nudge in the back, I think, but I'm talking to a full forward here as well. You'd always hope to get away with that. He did get away with one for a point earlier, so he probably went for it the second time. Conor Lane wasn't falling for it. it was probably the right decision. I think it was a tight call, but he tucked it away. He looks sharp. He's got great speed again, and I think he's a confident kind of player. So they worked really well, and maybe it's while Aidan O'Shea was maybe in there, that was maybe some of their better play. That certainly early in that second half, Aidan was in there a little bit causing trouble, and it was in that period when it was just they were rampaging. They were all over Galway, and the two boys were really looked really dangerous. Then in the first half, maybe Aidan, while he was in, I suppose he wasn't being effective. He wasn't being fed. So it was more on the two boys to do their own thing. So they linked up well better in the second half. Certainly with a bit more help around them.
Would you have liked to play it inside in the full forward line with Aidan O'Shea beside you? Like, where do you think James Horan needs to play him? Is he getting the balance right? He was very deep at times in that first half. You mentioned the turnovers. Then there was a moment before half time, the great fetch, he got turned over, and then the penalty to start the second half. Where do you think he should be playing?
Yeah, I think, I suppose it's a balancing act for Mayo. Like, they need him in a few places, so that's why there's a bit of change there. I would say if he could be worked on and kept in full forward, he would be a dream to play with, because he's his ball winning capabilities are evident for everyone to see, and he has good hands to offload to players like that. So he will be a magnificent focal point for forward for young lads, to come in and feed off and loop around. And if they could train that up, he'd cause an awful lot of hassle, because it might even take a second player to mind him, and then that frees something else up out the field, to create a different threat. So that's where I think he can cause most damage for Mayo. It's just at times they call on him to come out, for the midfield duel, because Galway did go long a lot in the first half, bypassing the Mayo press for the kick out, and that's probably why we found him out there a little bit trying to contest on that. And he found himself kind of drifting between positions, probably a little bit too much in that half. In the second half, he was much more influential.
So that's the 2021 Connacht Senior Football Championship final. Mayo winning by 6 points, 2-14 to 2-8. What's the count at now, Michael? Is it who's winning in the race to 50 with the Nestor Cup?
Yeah, that was what we were. Was it 47-46 to Mayo coming in today? And yeah, it's gone there. They've jumped 2 ahead now. So it's been tit for tat for a long time now. This great rivalry. I suppose it's a bit surreal that the game was played here. Could have been maybe 3,000-4,000 attending Castlebar. In fairness, they both got a half to enjoy. The Mayo fans certainly enjoyed the second half. The Galway fans enjoyed the first half. So whatever the 16,000-17,000 that were here, I think it was probably the right decision to move it. As a player, you don't want to be anywhere else bar out here, because it's immaculate condition, and the water sprinklers there are just softening it up again for the rest of the games next week. So and obviously Mayo are that bit more used to it. Or they've played so many games here in the last decade. For Galway, it was another opportunity to get up here, and for a young team, for a new team under Pádraig again, to get that experience. It didn't go well today, but it makes your next journey up here, with that group, a little bit easier.